Hey, good afternoon, YouTube. How are you doing? It's been a while since I've been on here, and there was a series of events that actually led me to this point. And I don't necessarily think it's really worth going all the way to the very beginning and or at least to the beginning in depth. But I'll just basically give a quick synopsis is that um I had this episode in my life that actually I wrote it as life changing, and I did this 100-day kind of challenge of getting reacquainted with myself and through meditation and whatnot. And it literally changed my life. But the funny part about it is that when I got to the end of it, um, I picked up some things along the way that if I was confused before, I was becoming even more confused. And that was almost to an extent of kind of being black pilled, if you will, a real nihilistic view of things. And then I started seeing things that was happening around the world that I really thought was very Luciferian. And it's kind of interesting that it, the more you look at life and you start saying, you know what, there's a conspiracy here, and it's to destroy the family, and it's very much as you start studying Luciferian doctrine, the one thing you can't deny is that if you're giving credence to Lucifer, you have to give credence to God. You can't have one without the other, if you know what I mean. You know, they each have to be real. And I found myself really starting to feel this righteous anger, if you will, like I was really upset with the Muslims and how they were moving into areas, and you'd always get the bad reports, and you couldn't help but feel it was a conspiracy with the New World Order and whatnot. And like I said, I became really angry, which I thought was kind of a anger of righteousness. The fire that I have in my belly is the fire that I have that God's given me, this has given me in place of. And then I started to watch people like Owen Benjamin and the likes that, they would talk about things that were happening, and again there was no love. It was just anger, and it's like, this is our side and this is their side, and we're drawing a line in the sand. And an interesting thing happened, that in the middle of all this, I got a I was I want to use the word awakened, but that's not really the word I'm looking for. But I became very much aware of the Spirit of Christ and the resurrected God, and I realized that there's no place for anger and hatred ever. And for those of us that think there is, it's it's misguided. And I began to see the power of Jesus and his words, and I I began to really look into the Eastern Orthodox Church and their theosis concept, and the fact that the desert mothers and fathers and the monks and the nuns did some amazing work, um, some amazing teachings. And I actually believe that, they that basically they were the Bible, the history of the Orthodox Church from the very beginning. And as much as my feeble mind can really understand that, I realize that just as this Luciferian concept is, um, that Satan has really infiltrated all aspects of society, politics, the schools, and especially the church. And I think when you get pastors like Rick Warren and Joel Osteen and whatnot, preaching the law of attraction and prosperity and whatnot, that it's really nothing more than mammon. But see, here's what I have to say about that. Western theology is relatively new in the bigger scheme of things. And I think what ended up happening is the church started to bring in the world and the spirits of the world to appeal to the masses. And in reality, it's really mammon. It's heresies. And even though that it feels good, and even though it seems like, oh, it's like the Lord changes and we need to change with the times, is I actually see that is a really big fallacy. But see that with the desert mothers and fathers of the Eastern Church, the Orthodox Church, see, they dealt with the heresies. Things that we call New Age today aren't new at all, and they dealt with it. And you know what you see? You see a church that seems really rather antiquated. You see a church that's very much stuck in the times of old times. And they almost look, if you look at them, almost like the garbs and stuff is almost as if it was they reached a point 2,000 years ago and they just haven't changed. But see, that's one thing that draws me to that church, is the fact that especially now, you see the importance of clinging back to the original teachings and being able to see the heresies that have crept into the church, and to know that the saints of our church has dealt with it, has put an end to it within their church, of course. And I'd have to say that that may seem like going off on a tangent of the Eastern Orthodox Church, but one of the biggest events that happened in my life that changed me was the Christchurch mass shooting. I was so scared that this whole Arab Spring, this rising tide of Muslims, that the way the world is very much embracing, was coming to my shores. And I didn't understand why we couldn't see what was happening elsewhere in the world and say, look, we're going to learn and we're going to, stop this before it happens. And when the Christchurch mosque shootings happened, all our women and our prime minister was wearing the hijab, and and I was angry, and I said some things I shouldn't have said, and again, I thought it was that righteous anger. And all that changed when, at that time, I recommitted my life. After a series of events, I recommitted my life to Christ. And I'm sitting in my car and I'm going to work, and I'm at the stoplight, and I look, and the guy parked right next to me is a Muslim. And how did I know? I could tell by the way he was dressed. He had a beard as bushy as mine. He had the prayer cap on. He had what I could tell was probably the gown. And he looked at me, and I looked at him, and and I smiled at him, and I nodded, and he did the same. But it was his eyes that I realized that, how could I be angered at him? I can't. Christ gave us two commandments, really, and that is to love our God and to love our neighbors. And I realize that I'm not here to judge, and I hope that when I die, that when I'm judged by Jesus, I will found that I've done everything he asked me to do, and I learned the lessons he taught me. And I really would hope for everybody that they could say the same thing. So I'm no longer judging. I think the world has too much anger and too much hate. And I think that by living our lives according to the scriptures, that we're going to be a good witness and have legitimate love towards one another. And this video is basically the beginning of those that I do want to renounce any beliefs that I've ever had, any words that I've ever said that was contrary to Christianity. And I want to say that I I hope each and every one of you will have that tug on your heartstrings. And I hope, and here's the deal, God speaks to us, Jesus speaks to us every day. But are we in a position to listen? When things are quiet and you settle yourself down and you listen, it's a beautiful thing. And I pray deeply that that happens to each and every one of you. And I just want to say thank you. You have a blessed day. Bye now.